Today we have commercial radio presenter and a recognisable voice from West FM Sundays and recent homeowner, Jonny Campbell on the call. Congratulations on the new home, mate. Finally.
Finally, it has been such a long time. I love how you've introduced me as homeowner. I've reached elite status now, but no, I appreciate that and thanks for the intro, man.
Well, before we get into the questions, I want to pull up your recent Instagram video of you slipping on ice. Absolute belter. I watched it maybe 15 times. How did you do it? Like, what happened?
Oh, do you know what it is? Right. So like, I don't know if it's just where I am. So I live in Bishopton, which is kind of just outside Glasgow, very close to Glasgow Airport, if there's anyone listening further afield. But the weather's been pretty rubbish recently. So there's been like a lot of snow and a lot of ice. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to get up early. I live pretty much on a building site because there's so many new homes being built. So I'm always getting woken up early by like diggers and workmen shouting. By the way, don't know what it is, but workmen who stand like a metre apart have to shout at one another. It's mental. So there's no alarm clocks needed in my street. But I got up early one morning and I thought I'm going to go for a walk. Went and walked to the end of the drive, and my driveway comes down on like a slight slope. And didn't see black ice. Obviously, it's black ice. You're not supposed to see it. And just slipped and went up in the air. And it was one of those like Scooby-Doo moments, you know, where like they're kind of running and their legs are moving and they're up in the air, but they're not really going anywhere. It was kind of like that. So yeah, I slept, and I was just saying to you before we started recording, like I had a bit of a sore back the week previous, and it was just getting better. And after the slip, it's just put it out again. So yeah, a bit painful, but I put it on my Instagram story, and I probably should make a highlight of it because I replayed it to so many songs of me falling, and I had quite a few messages of people saying that they were enjoying it. So maybe I'll take a good slip more often.
I think that's one of the greatest inventions in the 20th or 21st century is the Ring doorbell. The amount of funny clips that thing's captured. Like I seen online that it was a Ring doorbell clip where someone was being delivered their Chinese takeaway and they weren't in to receive it. They were running 15 minutes late. So the delivery guy said, sorry, we can't wait 15 minutes. So I'm going to have to take the food back to the restaurant and bin it. But the Ring doorbell captured the guy sitting on the guy's step eating his own Chinese.
If it's not bad enough that you missed your takeaway, to watch someone else eat it is like just soul destroying. But you're so right. The Ring doorbell is just an absolute work of art. And I should have mentioned actually the reason that I was able to post it was because the Ring doorbell captured the moment when I slipped, and I actually didn't fall. It was one of those like stumble moments where I'd done so many stutters and jutters that I managed to recover and get back on my feet. But yeah, in the process, put my back out. So I feel a bit like a pensioner this week. Stretch it off. But no, I'm good and I survived.
Good, mate. I'm glad you survived to make it on today. We spoke about this episode months ago before any podcast was released or any artwork was put together. So thanks for stopping by, albeit virtually.
No, I appreciate the invite, and like you say, yeah, we had this conversation a good while ago, when it was just a bit of an idea, and to see you come forward and have all these episodes out. I was saying to you just earlier as well that I'd started kind of listening and catching up on the podcasts. Life gets busy, and I was listening to the episode with Jen, and she was just so inspiring. But I'm so excited to listen to the rest of them, and I think you should be so proud, man. It looks great, and I'm sure the listeners feel the same. So, well done to you, man.
Oh, mate, that means the world to me. What I want to get out of this podcast today is to satisfy my own curiosity about life on the radio. I want to assure the things I think are true about the radio are correct, if that makes any sense. Do you think I'll be surprised about what I think I know?
It's a funny one. I think there'll be some things that you'll know. I think there'll be some things that will shock you, and some things that will make you question the whole legitness of the radio. Because there's a lot of things that happen in the radio that us presenters call the magic of radio. And we can get into this a wee bit more, but it particularly comes down to network or syndicated shows. So for example, we quite often get people who'll tweet if we're on a network show, which means you're on more than one station. So for example, if you're in Scotland and you drive from Glasgow to Edinburgh, your radio might be set to Clyde 1 in Glasgow, and I might be on air on all of these stations. And as you drive from Glasgow to Edinburgh, it will switch through to the Edinburgh equivalent radio station, which is called Forth 1. And when I'm on Clyde 1 and you're listening to me on Clyde 1, you'll hear me saying I'm on Clyde 1. But when you drive through to Edinburgh and you hear me on Forth 1, you'll hear me saying that I'm on Forth 1. And it blows people's minds about how can you be on both of these stations at the same time and you're saying Clyde 1 on Clyde 1 and Forth 1 on Forth 1. And it honestly blows people's minds. And we get quite a lot of tweets like folks saying, how does that work? And we all just respond that it's the magic of radio. But I might spill the beans today if you really want to know.
Well, I've got a tip for your network. I think we should get a voice patch or a voice filter that changes your accent from like a Glaswegian West Coast accent to a stereotypical horrible Edinburgh accent.
Can you imagine? That would just be incredible. Like as if it's for these network shows, you've basically got to like record yourself saying it's Clyde 1, it's Forth 1. Can you imagine the pain of having to re-record all of those in the dedicated accents? It would just be a nightmare.
I guess off the bat, mate, my main question's got to be, how the fuck do you get on the radio? What was your roadmap? And is this the typical method to entry?
It's such a good question. And so many people ask who are interested in getting into radio. And it's not the answer that they want to hear, but the answer is there is no set way. Like I know that there was a campaign ages ago that people were sharing on social media, and it was the no wrong path thing. So they hold a bit of paper and they get their photo taken, and it says hashtag no wrong path, and it lists some of the jobs that they've done. But it is so true. There's genuinely like no wrong path into radio. There's no qualification that you go and do that then says that you can definitely be a radio presenter and you can go into it. Actually, most people in radio have never studied media or studied radio or anything like that. So it's I would say it's a highly skilled job that doesn't really require skills, if you know what I mean. Like it doesn't require paper skills. But I suppose my way into radio was it was a bit strange. So when I left school in 2014 and I became an apprentice. So I'd done a modern apprenticeship program with a small company who were based just close to Braehead Shopping Centre, if anyone knows where that is. It's just outside Glasgow. And at this point, I'd done community radio. So community radio is basically a community radio station. You go along, anyone can get a show from the local community. You can do a show on whatever you want. They have quite a diverse choice of listening if you're on as a listener and tuned in. So there was like shows on people reviewing books. There were shows on people talking about local music and local bands. So anyone can go and get a show. So that's what I'd done. I don't know why. I'd always just been interested in radio. And when I was young, I used to phone up like my local radio station, which was Clyde 1. And I don't know, I was obsessed. And I won quite a few competitions because I used to do like impressions of, they used to do these prank calls in the morning. And there was a comedian who was on the air at the time with JOBBY. His name was Des McLean, who I later became friends with, which was just so bizarre. But I used to phone up all the time and done impressions. I ended up like I won loads of stuff off Clyde 1, like in the past. Like I won like a PlayStation. I can't remember if it was a PlayStation 2 or 3, probably a 3. I won like vouchers for a website called play.com, and I went and bought loads of PlayStation games, and it was insane. Randomly won Take That tickets. I was just always like in love with the radio, and it was from such a young age, and I was just obsessed. So I went and I done the volunteer radio. I was on a community station called Pulse 98.4, which is in Barhead. So I done that for a while. It was unpaid, but I just done it for fun because I enjoyed it. So I had like a Saturday show with them for a while. I could do it at the weekends, get dropped off, and then I ended up, I got my driver's license and I was able to drive and go there myself. And I just done it as a bit of a hobby. And then after my apprenticeship, and I started that and I went through that, it was in graphic design, websites, and kind of like hosting, a lot of geeky stuff that I enjoy as well. I realized that actually I want to kind of pursue radio. I want to do this more than just a hobby. So at that point, my apprenticeship was finished. I was still working on with that same company, but I thought I want to go to university. When I left school, I thought, I don't want to go into further education. I don't want to go to college. I don't want to go to uni. Studying wasn't for me. I didn't like having to study and then go and do exams. So I thought, I know what I want to do now. So I managed to get a place at UWS in Ayr. And I went and I studied, there was a wee fist pump there from David, yes, Ayr. And I went and I studied film, TV and radio at UWS in Ayr. And not far from the university is the kind of local commercial radio station called West FM. So when I was studying at uni, I thought I'm gonna hassle these people and I'm gonna see if they'll give me something, like whether it's a little job on the street team or whether I can come in on a placement or just shadow or just get a tour of the place. Like I was just desperate to get in and see what it was all about. So I managed to get through to one of the bosses there. There's a guy called Mike Richardson, who was also a presenter at the weekends. So Mike took me in and he kind of seen what I was all about, and he gave me a bit of a tour, and I was just buzzing. Like even just to get in the place was amazing. And I got in, had a tour. He said, look, I'm happy to get you working on the street team. So the street team are basically like almost like the marketing team for the radio station. They go out to events, they meet listeners, they give away prizes, they give away merchandise. So one of the big merchandise pieces that they always gave away, which people loved, was a West FM branded lanyard with a lip balm on it. It was honestly the strangest piece of merchandise, but everyone wanted one. So I gave away thousands and thousands of them over the years. And from there, I just kept getting roped into other things. So it was like, do you want to learn how to do traffic and travel? And we could use you as a backup in case anyone's off. So I done that. I was doing like little pieces on air in the morning. So at the time, there was a guy called Colin McCardle who was on the breakfast show. I used to go out and be like the street reporter kind of guy when we were doing competitions. And we ran some really crazy competitions. Like we were doing, when Pokemon Go came out, we were doing Poke Chips instead of Pokemon. So you had to find me and I would give you a Pokemon ball and you would get free fish and chips from the local chippy, which was just, it was some really random and bizarre competitions. One of the other ones that we had, which I don't know if we would get away with now, just with political correctness and stuff, we were giving away Beyonce tickets. And, you know, she has that song, If I Were a Boy. We were asking women to come and find us dressed as men. I know it's crazy when you think about it now, but this was like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and it shows you, I guess, how much things have changed. But people had to come and find me, and I would give them the Beyonce tickets. They would win them, all while we were like doing live bits to air, which was just insane. So I learned bits of traffic and travel. I'd done that, and then it ended up I started to do what you call demos, where you're in an off-air studio. And you kind of pretend that you're on air, I suppose, and then the boss would give you feedback. And it all boiled down to one Saturday when Mike, the boss that I was talking about a second ago, he was meant to be on air. He was unwell, and I got a phone call saying, Jonny, I don't feel well. Can you go and cover my show? And I just remember the absolute fear in my stomach thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to go here and I'm going to have to do this show. It's going to be live. And I'd done it a million times in the studio, like off air. I pretended I was on air and I knew how it all worked, but it was just that sudden panic. So I drove from where I live in Glasgow down to Ayr. And at the time, this radio station is part of a bigger group. So there was actually nobody in at the weekend other than the presenter. The news was all centralised from Glasgow. So I took the key that I had and I opened up the studio and I turned the alarm off for the building. And I remember going into this studio and I sat down in the chair and I thought, oh, right, I've got about 20 minutes until I'm supposed to go live on air to tens of thousands of people across Ayrshire. And the fear that came over was just horrendous. And I remember, like, as soon as the news had finished on the hour, that was my cue to start. I had to press a button that launched the show and it played a jingle and it was like Saturdays on West FM. And I remember pressing that button, and as soon as I pressed it, I honestly thought my stomach was going to fall out my arse. It was horrendous. And I don't remember the show. In all honesty, I don't really remember what happened after that. The kind of adrenaline took over. But I suppose to wrap up, because I am rambling, there is really no correct path into radio. Lots of people get into it by chance. Some, like George Bowie, for example, if anyone knows who he is, he's the breakfast radio presenter at Radio Clyde. And I think he's been doing the breakfast show for as long as I've been alive, which is 24 years. He came in as like a part-timer, and he covered for someone who was sick, and the person I don't think ever came back, and he remained on that show. And he's been on it for 24 years, and he's just made such an amazing name for himself. He's built up his GBX brand, which is all the kind of dance music. If anyone's not familiar, just Google GBX George Bowie. And it just shows you, like, some people fall into it by accident, but it is just fascinating. But it's a wonderful medium that is so underrated, but I love it, and it's been a big part of my life, even if things have kind of changed a wee bit in the past year or so, but it's just incredible.
That's such a warm roadmap. And to answer my question, there is no typical method to entry. And I'm trying to dissect that summation in my head. But one of the things that stood out for me is when you said it requires no skill for a highly skilled job, right?
Yeah.
If you were to be a model, you would have to audition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And probably your appearance or distinct features. Is there an auditioning process at all in radio? Like, what makes a good presenter? Is it like your voice?
That's a great question. I suppose, like, the voice aspect of it, most people don't speak in real life the way that they speak on air. There's a bit of we call it like a jock voice. So like I'm a radio DJ. Like, you know, like when you go to the fun fair or whatever, and the waltzers and the guys like, scream if you want to go faster. I suppose there's a lot of that happens because if you want to sound engaging and exciting, you need to sound a bit more engaging and exciting. If I was to say, like, sit back in my chair and say, I'm going to play Katy Perry now, and then I'm going to play Pink, like, people just wouldn't be interested. So you've got to give it a wee bit of pizzazz, a wee bit of something. But no, there's no auditioning process as such. As long as you seem keen and you seem like you're willing to learn, and you're willing to kind of work with the way that the station want to sound and the music that they play, because I'll talk about how the music's chosen in a wee bit, I guess, as well. But there really is no kind of auditioning process. In terms of what makes a good presenter, I think anyone who is down to earth, don't take yourself too seriously. Like, I know on some stations there's a lot of kind of like formal radio, and the conversations are really deep and really meaningful, and there might be stuff on politics or whatever. But if you want to make it in commercial radio, you really do have to love music. Like, I love music, and I listen to music all the time. I listen to podcasts quite a lot as well. Even working from home, like a lot of us have been during the pandemic, I have and I don't want to say her name, but the robot from Amazon, because she's sitting next to me and she'll go off her head in a minute if I say her name. But I have that on all the time with different radio stations. But I think anyone who's down to earth, doesn't take themselves too seriously, likes a bit of a chat and a bit of conversation, just the kind of a really kind of sociable person, I think, will be good on radio. And I suppose you've kind of got to read the room. And it sounds funny saying that, because radio is a strange medium that you can't really read the room. You're playing music out and you can't see the people on the other side enjoying it. You're telling stories that you think are funny, things that have happened in your life. For example, me absolutely decking it at the end of my driveway. I've got to build that story up and make it as funny as I think it is, without being able to see the people listening, and that in itself is quite difficult. So I think you need to be a really good storyteller. You've got to be a bit creative, using sound effects and using music to kind of match the drama or the feel that you're going for. So, for example, at Christmas time, when I was trying to talk about like the panic that I had, because I always left my Christmas shopping to the last minute, it's about using music like the Home Alone "We Slept In" music bed, which is and using like all these little tools just to make your storytelling come to life and make it a wee bit more interesting. Because if you imagine me telling a story about me trying to get all my Christmas shopping done, it's a bit boring if I've not got the music to build the drama up and the hype up, or I've got sound effects and all these things that you have at your disposal now, which just really help you. So I think they're the things. Be sociable, be outgoing, try and read the room in terms of matching the energy with your sound effects. Love a conversation, and to be honest, just answer the phone calls and take the texts and interact with the people who are listening. I think that's my version of what makes a good presenter. But yeah, it's mental.
Have you ever came across, just to invert that, have you ever came across a bad presenter like you've listened to on air on maybe another station or the same station and thought you're just not cut out for it? What makes a bad presenter then?
So I don't think there is such a thing as a bad presenter. I think a presenter who maybe comes across as bad is maybe just on the wrong station. You know, I know certainly for the company who owns West FM, they're called Bauer Media, and they own loads of stations across the UK and in Scotland as well. I think they own 7 stations. And if you're from Scotland, you probably listen to one of those 7 stations. If I can recite them quickly: Clyde 1 in Glasgow, Forth 1 in Edinburgh, West FM in Ayrshire, TFM in Dundee, North Sound 1 in the Aberdeen area, Radio Borders down in the Scottish Borders, and MFR in Inverness. Is that 7?
Reciting those lines must be like the punishment exercise if you tell a bad joke on air.
Yeah, yeah, horrendous. But chances are you'll have listened to one of those stations, and those stations are all aimed. They all play kind of chart music. They play a lot of Ed Sheeran, Pink, Katy Perry, anything that you hear in the charts that your mum would probably like. That's not too rappy, not too Stormzy. That's the kind of music that they play, and their target audience is actually kind of like mums on the school run. Now, a lot of people laugh when I say that because one of the biggest shows that happens on Clyde 1 in Glasgow is Super Scoreboard, which is a football phone-in show. But they do cater for other people. But the target audience is mums on the school run. So what I'm saying about people being placed on the wrong station, making them a bad presenter, if they are a wee bit older or they maybe don't resonate with that music as such, and they maybe are a wee bit, you can tell that they're a bit older when they're telling stories. So if they mention that they don't really know how computers work or something like that, for me, I think because I'm so critical of the radio, like I don't just have the radio on in the background. As soon as that microphone opens, I am listening and I'm analysing everything that person's saying, and I'm thinking about it from a radio point of view. So I'm thinking, oh, I like what he done with the music there. He brought that down. He used a sound effect, or he's too close to the mic, or he needs to come back. And it's something that I can't help. And I think everyone who works in radio is the exact same. But to get back to the question, I don't think there's such a thing as a bad presenter. Everyone obviously starts kind of at the bottom, and you get better with experience. It's like anything. But for those people who I hear who I think, oh, they're not very good, it's probably because they're not playing the right music. They're not on the right station, and maybe a different station would suit them a wee bit better and suit their age range and their kind of own target audience in their head a little bit better. But when I think back to how I was when I started, like I have clips of myself on the radio, like my first ever show on community radio, and I don't even think my voice had like broken yet. And even after like my voice kind of like started to sell out and got to where it was meant to be, I still heard changes in my voice. So as I got more experience, my voice became a bit like, I don't know, a bit more like polished, and I just found a way that was more my presenting kind of voice. But again, all these people on the radio, voices are quite adaptable. They can change their voice to like try and reflect the mood or the tone that they're setting. And I think as well, that's why a lot of people on radio end up doing voiceover work. So they voice adverts for TV, they voice adverts for the radio, for online, for anything at all. When you're on the phone and you're in a queue, press 1 for this and press 2 for this. So I think another skill that maybe goes into making a good presenter instead of a bad presenter is being adaptable as well, and being flexible and being able to change how you sound and how you operate. So
I love that insight, Jonny. I'm so glad that you safeguarded your career in freelance presenting by not pulling anyone down. Thanks for that, mate.
Yeah, that was the goal there. I wasn't the thing that we always say as well in radio, everyone knows everyone. You literally, like, you can't badmouth anyone because chances are the person that you're talking to knows them or knows someone who knows them. So you got to be careful what you say. But as a whole, to be honest, in radio, everyone's lovely, and I think there's not many people who I would term as an arsehole. I think people maybe think that if you get to a really high position in the radio, like you're on the breakfast show, they might think, oh, that person's probably up themselves, or they think that they're the best. When in actual fact, these people are genuinely so nice. I remember people asking me, like, you've met George Bowie, who's a bit of like a local celebrity in Glasgow. And he said, is he an arsehole, or what's he like? And people are always really surprised when I'm like, well, actually, he's a lovely guy. He's really nice. The first time I ever met him, he offered me a bit of Toblerone. And that's genuinely the truest story. I came into the office, I was on the street team at the time, and he's like, how's it going, man? He was like, what about Toblerone? And he'd just come off air. It was 10 o'clock, like 10 in the morning. And he was like, do you want a bit of Toblerone? I didn't know the guy. This was pre-COVID as well, but chances are I wouldn't get within 2 meters of his Toblerone now. Not a euphemism, by the way, but yeah, it's a funny industry. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone's lovely. They're really nice people.
We spoke about this before, but when we spoke about the adaptability of voices, obviously we don't see your face on air, so we just have to make this kind of mental model or mental picture of how we see you. And I think the gentleman's Billy Kirkwood. He's got a very nice voice to listen to, but I assumed he'd be this kind of stereotypical white middle-aged man, maybe grey hair, glasses, wears a suit to work kind of guy. And then when I googled him, he's like a pure like punk rock kind of gothic guy.
He's
like
a goth.
The complete opposite of what I assumed. And it's just funny how your brain makes. I don't know the neuroscience behind it, but it must kind of link a voice that you've heard before to that person, and then some way or another builds like a ideal picture in your brain, right?
It's so funny, because I do the same as well. And I think only having worked in radio and doing my research on people and knowing what they look like, I now don't suffer from that, because I know how most people look because I've came across them on Facebook or I've met them at events or whatever. But you're so right, and I do it in everyday life as well. Like, see, even just on the phone to someone, like I was on the phone to Virgin Media the other day trying to sort my TV and internet out, and I do it all the time. I picture what that person looks like in my head, and I don't know how. There must be some science to it. You need to get like some sort of doctor on who can describe what's happening here. But you're so right. I think we've got this tendency to try and make a vision of what this person looks like. But you're so right. If anyone knows who Billy Kirkwood is, and if you're from Ayrshire and you listen to the breakfast show Billy Kirkwood at Breakfast, then yeah, you might have an idea of what he looks like in your head. But Billy, he actually in real life is a goth. He has like big black glasses. He's got the big thick ear piercings. He dresses in black. He's got all sorts of tattoos. But again, it's so funny in terms of stereotypes, because if I think like someone's a goth, I think they're quite like introverted. They don't kind of like, they're not so outgoing. I've got a cat meowing in the background there. Did you hear that?
No, that's fine.
But it's funny because he is totally not the typical goth. He's so outgoing. He's really funny. He's actually a stand-up comedian outside of radio as well. And it is just like hilarious. But I don't know what it is in our brains that make us think that someone, if they sound a certain way, this is how they look. But I suppose that's one of the beauties of radio, because you can be a completely ugly bastard like me, and you can sound so sexy on the radio with the help of some music and a wee bit of tone in the voice. But no, it's amazing. But it's funny because I'm surprised you never cracked the joke there, David, about, oh, you've got a face for the radio. Because see, if I had £1 for every time I heard that, I wouldn't be working.
Mate, you have no idea. This is so serendipitous, because that was my next lead to my next question. I was going to say, mate, oh, you've definitely not got a face for the radio because you're a handsome bastard, but you've identified it. We both agree you're ugly. I'm only joking.
We'll end the podcast now.
But do you ever find solace in being shielded behind the mic and not having like an instantly recognizable face? I mean,
yeah.
You would, for example, if you were to present on another medium, for example, TV, you would recognize Sean Batty from The Weather, and you'd recognize John Mackay's hourly receding hairline on in person. But you know what I mean? You would recognize John Mackay if you saw him on the street. Do you feel solace in being shielded from that?
Yes and no. I'll start by saying, I suppose the lovely thing about it is these people, I feel like there's probably more pressure. There's a camera staring right at you, and you know that, like, by looking at this camera, people are seeing you. I suppose on the radio, it's a bit different because if I cast my mind back to the first day I was on the radio or commercial radio for the first time I was being paid to actually be on the radio, and it wasn't a community radio station, when I was covering Mike and Mike wasn't well, I remember thinking, why am I getting so nervous? I'm sitting in a room with a microphone. There's nobody here. I'm literally talking to myself, and I was getting so freaked out about it. But then every couple of minutes, I would have that doom hanging over me of there's actually probably about 50,000 people listening to you right now, maybe more. Because if you count a radio playing in a shop or a restaurant, there's all, however many people's in that shop and restaurant also hearing you. So I kept having that little thought in my head of, well, actually, there's this amount of people listening, even though you're telling yourself you're in this room and it's just you and a microphone. But in terms of finding solace, I think in a way, yes. Not that I was ever on like a primetime radio spot or a kind of local household name, if you like, the way that maybe George Bowie or Billy Kirkwood or whoever is. I suppose it must be nice in a way for folk like Sean Batty and John Mackay and stuff to get recognised, but I dare say that gets old after a while, and you're like, I can't even go and do my food shop without folk hassling me for a picture or whatever. But it is funny. I remember when I was covering a radio show, I was kind of down in the Scottish borders for maybe 3 months. I was offered a show to cover. So they were basically, a presenter was finishing up and a new presenter was starting on that show, but there was a 3-month gap of notice periods where this guy who was on the show was leaving and the new guy couldn't start for 3 months. So they roped me in and they said, do you want to move down to the borders for 3 months? Do you want to do this show? And it was 10 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. So it was midday, mid-working day. And I remember I moved down there and I was living in student accommodation. It's fucking showbiz, by the way. And not even put up in like a 5-star hotel. Everyone thinks it's so showbiz and, you must get paid a fortune. In reality, I was living at the Heriot Watch student accommodation on a shitty bed that hurt my back more than my back is sore now. And I remember doing this show, and it's funny because the Scottish borders, if you've never been, it's such a community. Like, everybody knows everyone. Everyone knows everyone's business, and it's just so well connected. It's such a small place, and everybody loved Radio Borders, which was it was kind of like the only radio station. You couldn't really pick anything up in the area, so everyone listened to it, and it was like everybody's life. So I remember, like, just to give you an example before I continue on with this story, one morning it was really cold, kind of like this morning, and it was icy, and I got out of the student accommodation and I went down to my car, and my car was all iced over, and I didn't have a scraper and I didn't have de-icer. So I had my car fans on hot, on full, and I was scraping my car with a credit card. And I remember I just made a throwaway comment on the radio. I was like, oh, it's a chilly one today across the Scottish borders in North Northumberland, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, it was terrible. I didn't even have a scraper or de-icer to hand this morning. 10 minutes later, a guy dropped by the station and dropped off a bag with de-icer and a scraper in it for me. And I was like, this is incredible. Like, what a small community. So the next link I went on and I said, I am absolutely skint. I could do it like 50 grand, but nobody showed up. But just to give you like an example, that's how much of a small, close-knit community it was. And I used to go my food shop at Tesco, and sometimes I used to think, everyone loves Radio Borders. If only they'd know like that I was on, and maybe it would make them excited or something like that. So I always did think
your ego peaked then, Johnny, when
I
you
know,
wanted to
I
be
was like,
recognised in like the local
Tesco. Oh my God, is that Johnny buying own brand carrots? What the hell? Times are tough, people. But yeah, I think that's the only time I've ever kind of thought, I wonder what it would be like to be recognised. But I think, yeah, it's funny being able to like shield away, and it's the same for like you know, these even big names like George Bowie, not everyone knows what he looks like. And again, that's because he's on the radio. I suppose you've got some radio presenters like Des Clark, who was on Capital Breakfast and is now on Heart Drive in Scotland. He does a lot of TV stuff with the BBC as well. He does breaking the news and stuff. And he's a stand-up comedian, so he's on a few kind of stand-up shows. So I think he's a wee bit more recognisable now. There's a lot of crossover, and I think with social media, there's these cameras in the studios as well now, so they're doing a lot of live streaming. So I dare say in the next couple of years it will become more like that, where people will be recognised, because radio has evolved into a visual form as well as just an audio kind of medium. So yeah, it's interesting.
In the very same vein, have you ever been recognised for your voice?
The only time I would say I used to do the odd voiceover, and the only time that I was ever recognised, I'd done a voiceover for Skills Development Scotland, who are part of the Scottish government. They basically exist to try and enhance people's skills and make them more employable and stuff. And they do a lot of work with like apprentices and stuff. So I'd voiced a few adverts for them. And at the time, after I'd finished my apprenticeship, I was on their like ambassador program to try and promote apprenticeships to other young people. So I was going out and speaking at schools and going to careers fairs and stuff. And I remember one day I had to come into the Skills Development Scotland offices, and quite a few people were turning and looking at me. And they were like, I could see people talking, and I was thinking, have I spilled something on me? Or like, why are people staring at me? And it was because they had recognized I was on like a lot of their posters and stuff at the time for like apprenticeships. And I didn't know this either, but I'd been put on, I'd had to sign a slip to say that I was happy for my photos to be used, because they'd taken photos and stuff of me as well as doing the voiceovers. And I signed away to say you can use it to do whatever you want. And I was actually on a couple of taxis in Edinburgh. I was on the side of them, like promoting apprenticeships. And it was kind of like, oh, I worked in graphic design and web design at the time. And it was about how apprenticeships aren't just like joinery or construction. So that was the only time I was noticed. But again, it wasn't for the voice. It was probably more for just being seen. But that was the most low-key celeb point of my entire career.
Jonny, I would have loved to see you mangled after a night out, getting in a taxi with your own face on it.
Mate, can you take a photo? That's me. That's me on the side of the taxi. I know, it was insane. But no, in terms of for my voice, not really. No, I wouldn't say I've really been recognised for it. It's a funny one, because like when I talk about voiceovers as well, obviously like adverts and stuff reach a lot of people. In some cases, more than what a radio show would reach. Because I've voiced adverts for a whole range of different companies and organisations, like Calmac Ferries, for example. Like I voiced 12 adverts for them once. And I often think, I wonder how many people heard them, or like, I wonder if they've had a vision of what I look like, because what we were just talking about. So, I've never been recognised as such. It's a funny industry in terms of using your voice, but I suppose it comes with its benefits of not being hassled in Tesco when you're buying your value carrots. So.
Taking back your super noodles to make a piece in super noodles at your head at what company?
Student life, yeah.
Let's get into the nitty gritty of things, mate, right? How much creative control do you have over your show? Do you have a fixed agenda? I know you've given my dad a shout out for his homemade spag bol numerous Sundays in a row. Also, fun fact, I spoke about a Tinder date on one of your shows too. So how much control do you have?
It's funny. I think shows vary. Some shows have like a dedicated producer who try and steer the show in a direction, so it's a wee bit more planned. The execution of it's a wee bit more thought through. But for most people who don't have a producer, you do have a good bit of creative control. Like you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. They do tell you to stay away, for law purposes, stay away from court cases that are ongoing, because obviously you can't really get involved in that. You should also stay away from politics, because obviously people have difference in opinions. So really, I think the only guidance that they give you is, don't talk about things that are a bit sensitive or things that people disagree on, like football teams. Don't go on and tell the listeners that you are totally cheering on one team when there's people who are supporters of all different teams listening. So don't talk about that. But in all honesty, you're given a schedule for your show, and this is the same. This is true for most commercial radio stations. the music's all selected for you. So most radio stations work off of playlists. So they'll have like an A, B, and a C list. So for example, and I don't know if this is the exact way they work, but most of them work in this kind of similar format. On the A list, that will be all the most kind of played songs, the ones that they play regularly. The B list, will be still popular kind of chart songs, but they don't play them as much. And C list is songs that they play every now and then. It might be the odd throwback from the 80s or 90s or something. And there's a program that works for most radio stations that is called Selector. So it selects songs from each of these lists and it compiles them. So it plays mostly A's, a couple of B's, and the odd C list song. And when you go on and you start your show, you're given a sheet or a sheet for each hour, and it tells you the songs that are loaded up to play. So when you actually go into the studio, you don't actually have to sort and pull all those songs from the folders or whatever. Back in the day, you obviously had to go and get the records or the vinyls or the CDs, and you had to like line them up, and it was really like a job that kept you busy. Whereas now everything's done on the computer. It all plays out through a playout system on the computer. All that music that's scheduled and ready to go is loaded in for you already. So actually, all you have to do every now and then is just keep an eye on that song finishing. It'll tell you you can talk between this song and this song, and you've really just got to do your talking. So nowadays in the radio studios, most people can just have a bit of a chilled out time. They sit back, relax. Back in the day, you were running about looking for such and such a record by whatever artist, getting it out of the shelf, playing it, then after it, putting it back in its little folder, putting it back in alphabetical order on the shelf. I can't even imagine that would be enjoyable. Yeah, it would be tough. Just think of the steps you would get. But I don't know. In terms of creative control, yeah, you do have an element of creative control. I suppose you've just got to work within the parameters of the songs that have been picked for you. And you're kind of told the timings that you should talk. So really, for most radio stations, unless you're like talk radio or you're on Radio 1 on the BBC, where they have kind of longer, we call links the bit that you talk. So in between two songs, you'll have a link, and the link is the bit where you turn on the microphone and you talk. So BBC Radio 1, for example, they'll have longer links that are like a couple of minutes. But for the stations I was working on, usually they would try and say like maybe 40 seconds to a minute. On some occasions, you can have up to 2 minutes, like if you're doing a read for a competition or something like that. But you can kind of say what you want. If you want to get somebody on the phone, you can do that. Like, for example, when we had you on, you were talking about a Tinder date that you had. But yeah, you've kind of got creative control. Occasionally you'll be told like you need to do a wee read or a mention for this competition or whatever. But yeah, you've got a good element of control.
I was surprised about that, and I was also surprised that the calls are not live calls. Like, for example, like you said, I always used to give you feedback on a Sunday in real time of how I was enjoying your show, and I think we spoke on on Messenger that I had this funny Tinder story, or you should do a segment on Tinder, and I presumed that you would have to schedule that weeks in advance, but you did it within the next hour. You're like, David, can you call in? It'll be pre-recorded, but it'll sound like it's live. Can you talk me through the call-in process? And if you want to, you can mention my story if you want.
Yeah. So yeah, everything is done really live. I didn't have a producer at the time, so everything that I done was on me. If I had a producer, that producer would be there and maybe would assist with some of that, and they would line up you as a caller while I'm working on other stuff. So they would be an extra pair of hands. In terms of the call-in process, really there's an extra screen, which is the phone system. So there's like maybe 20 lines, for example, and there's 20 different callers can call in at the same time, and you see the screen, it's all flashing. And if you want to take a call, you can take it. Most of the time we would pre-record them just in case there's any nutcase who just goes on a rant about politics, or they talk about the good old days when such and such a presenter was on. or just if they swear, because obviously we've got to adhere to like Ofcom rules. So there's like broadcasting rules in place, the same as any other radio station or TV channel. You know, you can't show like propaganda for like some extremist group or something like that. So you've got all these kind of Ofcom conduct rules that you've got to follow in terms of you can't have swearing on the program or whatever. Like the TV, there's no swearing before 10 p.m. or 9 p.m. or whatever time the watershed is. So yeah, we pre-record the calls just for that reason. And it means as well, if you tell a story, David, if you come on as a caller and you tell a story and you do a lot of and you do these humming and haw bits that just take up extra time. Bear in mind, I'm only allowed to talk for maybe like a minute at a time on the radio. You're cutting into my minute. So I would cut out those ums and ahs, and I would edit the call. And sometimes if the call doesn't go the way that you want it to, or like, I mean, this happens all the time. You tell someone they've won 50 grand in a competition and they go, "Oh, that's great, thanks." And you're like, "Is that it, mate?" Like sometimes on a call, I would be like, "Come on, you're going to need to give me a bigger reaction or a bigger cheer than that, because if I take you back to what I was saying earlier, you've got to sound exciting and a wee bit engaged, and you've got to have a bit of something about you and make it enjoyable for people to listen to." I hated giving away money, because I don't know if it's just a Scottish thing or a West of Scotland thing. When I gave away money, and I didn't always get, like, I think the most I ever gave away was like 5 grand. I was on the kind of local shows which had less money to give away, but I gave away like 5 grand, and folk would be like, "All right, thanks." And I would be like, "Is this it?" So on those calls, I would say, "No, right, let's try that again. You've won 5 grand. You're going to be very excited." And I would say, "Right, we're going to do it." I says, big energy, 3, 2, 1. "You've just won 5 grand." And they would go, "That's great. Thanks very much." I'd be like, "Oh my God, how many times are we going to record this?"
I
So that's
thought
the
that was
reason.
completely live, those reactions.
No, I
That
mean,
that
in a way, they are live, so they're live at the time. If someone gives you a good reaction and you don't have to ask them to do it again, right? That doesn't happen all the time, where you'll say, "Right, come on, give me that a bit better." But most of the time,
work for your money, Hen. Work for your money.
do you want the 5 grand or do you not? We'll pick somebody else if you don't give me a good reaction.
You know what? That's only worth a grand. You're only getting a grand now, darling.
Right, scrap the 5, just transfer a 1. But no, like, they don't get me wrong, most of them do happen like as live, so they happen in real time, and what you hear usually is how the call went. But again, in case that person really goes over the top and goes, "Oh my fucking God," or they start swearing or something, obviously that's why we pre-record. And it means as well that from a presenter side, if you've not got a producer, you can just record the phone call dry, what we call dry, so with no music or no we call the music that you play under voice, we call that beds, like music beds. So you can record it dry, and then when you're getting ready to play it out on the radio as live, so you'll say, "Right, let's make the phone call. Who's going to win the money?" And you play the pre-record and you hear the phone ringing. It means that the minute we tell them that they've won X amount of money, we can hit the play button on the big music bed. It's like big energy, dun 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 dun, and it just builds up the energy a wee bit. So yeah, that's the reason that they're pre-recorded. Not a lot of people know it. The only exception to that really is the football phone-in. Maybe I shouldn't tell this, because then maybe people will go on and try and play the system here. But the football phone-in is more close to live. I think they have a short delay of about 10 seconds. So what you hear on the football phone-in is 10 seconds behind what's happening in real life as
What is a
those
football
calls are
phone in?
taken. Say that again.
What is a football phone in?
So the football phone-in is it's called Super Scoreboard. It's on Clyde One, and it is, oh God, what time is it on at? It's just after Grant. Is it Grant Thompson? Oh, do you ever had those like brain freezes? It's on like just after kind of drive time, before the evening show. So Callum Gallagher comes on in the evening. It's just before him and after Gary Spence. That's who it is. So basically, they have a panel of pundits, and they will kind of cover the games that are on. They'll get people to phone in with their opinion on the game or what they think their prediction would be, and you get a lot of really passionate football fans. especially being in Glasgow, most people are very upfront and will speak their mind. And if they think a manager is rubbish, they'll come on and they'll have a right good moan to the guys that they think this football manager is terrible. So when these people phone in, it's pretty much live. There's a 10-second delay. And again, that 10 seconds is for if somebody swears, the presenter can hit, there's a button on the desk called dump call. It's the dump button. So if somebody swears, so if someone drops an F-bomb, as soon as I hit the dump call button, it cans that call, and it will also can the last couple of seconds so that that swear word doesn't make it to air. So quite often, if you hear one of these people saying, "Oh, we've lost such and such," chances are it's because they've swore and they've dumped the call as a result. And they don't often want to say, "Oh, we have had to ditch that because such and such has been swearing." They just dump the call and they pretend they've lost the person and they move on. And it's funny because they use that button quite a lot. And it's not because people come on and they want to swear. It's because it's such a West of Scotland thing that people swear as a kind of joining word in a sentence.
Punctuation, it's a comma.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I remember a guy came on and he was talking about a football player, and he says, he's a good gun. And the next minute, the call was dumped because that can't go out. He didn't mean it with any offense or any malice, but we can't broadcast that or we would have our license taken off us. So yeah, it's funny. And that's the reason the calls are recorded. But it also is actually really good because it means as well, if something hilarious happens, we've got copies of it. I mean, we can get a copy of anything. If something goes out live, I can go back and get a copy of it later on. But that's the reason we pre-record them. But yeah, I remember I got you on, you were talking about your Tinder story. I can't actually remember the full details of the story. You met up with someone, you met her, she was across the road and you couldn't cross at the same time or something like that. I can't remember
for 7 minutes, and I was doing the hokey cokey in the road, and I realised it was live on West FM, and my peers and people I went to school with will be listening to this, and I wouldn't say I've got a recognisable voice, but they probably could put two and two together. And the final question that you asked me was, "So what happened?" And to safeguard myself, I said, "Oh, we're now married with 3 kids," or something like that.
That was it. I know I should have edited in like wedding bells or something like that after the call. But yeah, that's the power of radio. But it is amazing, like, how much you can build up stories with like music, and I think a lot of people take that for granted. They don't realise what exactly goes into what you hear on the radio. So like when you hear somebody winning the money, it's not just as the simple case of a call. It's that call was maybe recorded 10 minutes ago. I've had to quickly edit it whilst watching that there's still songs going out on the air. Because when you're recording as well, you've effectively got to you've got to set the desk to telephone record. So straight in your headphones and in the speakers in the studio, you can't hear the music that's going out. You've got to trust the system that music's still going out, and I can see on the screen in front of me that song's still playing. I can't hear it. It gives you a little bit of paranoia. And you've got to also trust the technology that when I'm recording this call, that it's not going to air live over the top of that song. So there's a lot of trust in the technology, but certainly where I was working, and I work with Bauer on a freelance basis. So I cover when people are off on holiday or sick or whatever. So I do still go in and do shows. I've done 2 weeks just before Christmas there on a network show, so across 7 stations in Scotland. But the technology that they've got is brilliant. Their studios are brilliant. They're brand new, kind of state of the art. And yeah, you've got to trust that it all works. But sometimes the technology can work and it can be you that messes it up. And I suppose on these network stations as well, these network shows, you're not just messing up on one station in one area, you're messing up nationally on 7 stations across the whole of Scotland. So that's the funny thing I always think of in my head.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but did you say you can't hear the music wrapping up, or can you hear any of the song that's playing?
So when you're recording a phone call, you can't hear anything. You can't hear any of the music that you're currently playing on air. So you've got to trust the screen that is still going out and the listener can hear that.
But generally, you can hear the music if you're not taking a call, right? Okay, that's good.
Absolutely.
That's huge trust in technology.
Yeah, so that would be so boring as well, being in the studio and not being able to listen to any music. But no, it plays in the studio while the songs are on. You can hear it, comes through the speakers. You can turn it up or down. You can turn it off if you want, but you can do whatever.
I mean, you must play the same songs over and over again. You must be fed up of playing certain songs. How do you maintain your enthusiasm behind such tracks when you've literally heard it 50 times over the last month?
That's a good question. I think you learn to become a good liar. Like for example, we used to play like I think we still do. We play Ed Sheeran, Castle on the Hill, about a million times a day. Same as George Ezra, Shotgun. Um, and I think most presenters like so we're all on Facebook and we're all friends with each other in a private, Facebook setting. It's not public. And sometimes presenters will share like, "Oh, I just played George Ezra for the 400th time today. Kill me now," and like just daft things like that. And it's a bit of banter, but I think in terms of radio, people listen for an escape. People listen because they're commuting. Maybe they're driving to work. They can't be bothered going to work. They don't want to go to work. It's another day of working for the man, but they've got to do it. And I think the role of radio is really the least we could do is try and make people feel better. Even if we don't enjoy the music that we're playing, we would at least try and hype them up and be like, "Oh, I love that so much. He's a legend. He's going to be," and even if you're not enjoying it, you can find things to say that makes it sound like you're enjoying it. So, for example, if I'm playing George Ezra in Shotgun and it's got a minute left, I'll jump on Google quickly and see when he's next touring in Scotland. And I'll say, "Oh, I love George Ezra, so good. Oh, he's coming to the O2 Academy in Glasgow on such and such a date." And it's just little things that you do to try and kind of hype it up a bit. So yeah, that's what I would say. Become a good liar. But it's funny actually. I've just, as you were saying at the start, homeowner now and stuff, and we got the keys to our house just at the end of November last year, and I was moving stuff over from my mum and dad's house, and I found my first ever selector sheet. So that sheet that I was talking about earlier that has all the songs that you're playing listed for each hour, and I found my very first one from that Saturday that I was covering Mike, and I kept it. I thought I had it in this drawer next to me, but I don't. I must have left it at my mum and dad's house. But I was laughing because the first ever song that I played was Pink, Just Like Fire. And every time I play it, it still haunts me. I'm like, oh God, I remember how sick I felt while that song was playing. It was my first song. And I genuinely, I must have been, there was no mirrors in the studio, but I must have been so pale, like so white, and I looked ill. I felt ill. But yeah, become a good liar. That's my best advice.
I love that personality behind that story. And I mean, if I heard the song Shotgun on the way to work, I would find another use for a shotgun, I think, for work. But I want to know, mate, what's the biggest mistake you've made on air? You must have made one. Or have you heard of another story from another presenter that's just an absolute shambles? Please share. Come on.
I could tell you a few, to be honest. It's funny the way you phrased that question. What's the biggest mistake you ever made on air? I think the biggest mistake I ever made was taking the station off air. So I've done this a couple of times. Probably shouldn't admit this where we're talking about future employability here. I'm so past this. If there's any radio bosses listening to this, I don't do this stuff anymore. It was just back in the day when I was still learning. But no, I've took stations off air before by accident. So I've completely knocked them off of the air. They're not broadcasting anymore. And if you were to tune into that station, you would just hear
no,
because there was nothing going out. So as you can imagine, the first time I'd done it, I actually didn't know I'd knocked us off air. I can't even remember what I'd done technically, because they do make it very hard now for you to take the actual station off air. So basically I disconnected the studio to the live output of the station. So at the radio stations, you'll usually find that there's a big satellite dish that basically sends the frequency, the signal out and broadcasts it. And I somehow disconnected my studio, which was the live studio. I disconnected it from broadcast, and I didn't realize. So I was just doing my thing as I normally would, playing the songs, talking. But the technology is so good now in the radio that if you knock a station off air, an email alert will be sent to all the bosses and all the presenters. So they have something called a radio monitor, which basically constantly checks, is this radio station broadcasting a signal? So it looks at the sound waves, and if the sound waves are flat, there's nothing. So it's this is a bit gruesome, but like the heart monitors in the hospital, if they're flat, there's no signal and the person's dead. It's the same with the sound waves and the radio. So if this line is flat and they detect that there's no waves, there's no sound coming out, an alert is sent by email to all of the bosses, and somebody will phone you pretty quickly to say, the station's off air, you need to sort this out. And usually a broadcast engineer will phone you, or they'll remote into the studio so they can remotely connect to the studio on the computers, and they can check what's going on and get you connected. But one of the times that I was on air, I was actually I was working doing the kind of street stuff. So I think it was one of the times we were doing one of these daft competitions. So it was Colin McCardle who was on with Zoe Kelly on the West FM breakfast show years ago. And at the time, I was out and people had to come and find me. I think it might have been for the poker chips thing, actually. And there was terrible weather. So I was out in the West FM car. This we call them pool cars. I was out in the pool car. And I drove to this location where I was to stand, and people were to come up and get the Pokemon ball off me. And I remember the weather was horrendous, and I had an umbrella, and it was chucking it down. Like, I've never seen rain like this before. And I thought, can we just pull this competition because it's horrible? There was also thunder and lightning happening as well. And I kid you not, this is like something you see on a movie. The lightning had struck the antenna at the radio station and knocked the station off air, and they couldn't get it reconnected. So I'm stood, I can't even remember where I was. I was in some big park in Ayrshire somewhere. It was absolutely chucking it down. I've got an umbrella. There's thunder and lightning happening, and I'm standing with a bag of Pokemon balls waiting on people coming to find me. The people can't find me because they're mentioning it on air, and it's not actually being broadcast to anyone. And I'm just stood here in the pissing rain, waiting, waiting on nobody. If only that'd have been a step beyond. But yeah, that's probably like the biggest mistake I've made. The other mistakes that I think are not commonly made, but occasionally, if someone's out at an event or something like that, they don't like to do this. Most radio stations don't like to do this now, like have people pre-recorded, like a pre-recorded show. More so in case something happens live. So if there's, and I mean, God forbid, if there's a terrible like act of like terrorism or something, they don't like having pre-recorded shows, because see, if something like that extreme was to happen, they would cut the music and they basically change their output, and they would maybe go to news. And if you're playing a pre-recorded show on a radio station, you can't just do that. You would have to cut the pre-record. That presenter's not even there to say, right, we've got breaking news, this is happening. So they don't like to do that anymore. But some of the mistakes that are made with pre-records are hilarious. I can't say who it was. I can't say who it was, but there was a presenter, not from the radio station that I worked at, but from another radio station. It was a guy, and he was recording a show. Now they sometimes use pre-recorded shows over Christmas because people don't want to work Christmas Day and they want a day off with family and stuff. He had pre-recorded a show to go out over Christmas, and when he was pre-recording it, he made so many mistakes, and he was doing his links, and he recorded, and he was trying to say the time, and I think, let's just say the time was 5:10, and he kept saying, it's 5:10, I'm such and such, and he kept messing it up. So I think there was 15 attempts of him saying, it's 5:10, and he was swearing as well because he kept getting it wrong. And it ended up, he forgot to edit it out, and it went to air, and it was him saying, it's 5:10, oh, for God's sake, it's 5:10, and he just couldn't get it. And I think it went out, it played some like 15 times before the correct link actually got played, and it continued on with that show. But yeah, it can go wrong in radio, and it does. But in all honesty, I think it's funny when it does. Like it shows that we're human. Like we're the same as the listener. We're the same as everybody else. Mistakes happen, and I actually think it's a kind of rite of passage. Like I'm so glad I made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and it's just part of like learning and developing and getting better. And it's the same in every industry. You've got to make mistakes to learn from them. So. But yeah, God forbid.
Finally, a self-development message out of this radio banter chat, mate. Thanks for that. You've done my job for me.
There's my development point. I've had a note in front of me all podcasts that says make a development point, so I can tick that box now. I've made it.
Well, now we've ticked that box. What is the wildest calling that you've had? What's the craziest calling?
Oh, it's so difficult because there's a lot of wild calls. We get still do. We get a lot of calls from people who maybe have learning difficulties, or maybe they've got some stuff going on and they're maybe not in a great place. And I'll take a step away from the humor that we've had so far. I think radio is such a comfort to some people who maybe they're lonely, or maybe there's some tough stuff going on in their life right now, and it's an escape for a lot of people. Like, I know that I spoke about it being an escape for people on their way to work, and they can just forget about life for a bit, and they can forget that they're going to work for the man and they're going to be doing the 9 to 5 and all that, and it's an escape in that sense for a lot of people. But I think for some people who are going through tough times, who are maybe feeling a bit low, or they're maybe feeling depressed, we actually had a lot of folk that called up who were like alcoholics and stuff, and they would quite often tell you that they were alcoholics, or there was stuff going on in their lives. And I think it's funny to laugh at some of them when you think about what they say. Like, I used to have a guy who I think had learning difficulties, and he used to constantly ask me for a 2004 West FM mug. Now, I wasn't at West FM in 2004. I have no idea what a 2004 mug is. Every week he would phone me and he would ask me for it. And I think a lot of people learn and realize, right, I'm not taking that call because I recognize that number. He's going to ask me for this 2004 mug. But I always had a thing in my head that told me, answer the call, because you never know what that person's going through on the other side. In all honesty, it's not like the old times where I'm running about looking for records and checking alphabetically for my next track that I've got to play. It's all loaded up on a computer. I've got time where I'm sitting here, or I'm sitting on my phone between songs, just wasting my time, where actually I might be the only person that caller speaks to all day. They might not speak to anybody else. They might not have contact. They might not leave the house. So there was a lot of wild calls. The 2004 mug one was one of the funniest. That he used to phone me all the time. And one of the times I remember I didn't answer because I think I had stuff on and I was trying to edit a call. So I never took his call, and I think he thought I was ignoring him. So he phoned from a different number. So he told me that he'd phoned from his carer's phone, and I was like, this guy's a genius. But yeah, there was a lot of wild calls, a lot of funny calls as well. And most of them are like connected with like things that you've said at the time. But I think in terms to turn your question a bit more like serious and a bit more deep, it was quite an amazing feeling on the radio to know that you could be that only person that one caller speaks to in a day, and I think that was pretty amazing. And it kind of reminded me, actually, well, a lot of people say radio is dead and there's no future in radio, and it's all about social media and TV and visuals and stuff. Radio is an incredibly powerful medium that I think it was lost for a wee while. A lot of people did say that it was dead and it was on its way out, and TV and video would prevail. But I actually think radio is making a huge comeback, like certainly in the past couple of years, and might even make a bigger comeback now that I've kind of gone off air a wee bit. People might actually be like, okay, we'll go back and we'll give this radio thing a try. But like, I've quite often heard of people go to sleep with the radio on just because they like a bit of background music. And yeah, well, exactly. Like, they just like that background music or that company. And I always remember when I was down in the Borders at Radio Borders, a guy used to phone me all the time. We used to do this thing at 10 o'clock when I started called the Top 10 at 10. And quite a few of the stations done this. You play 10 songs from one mystery year, you give away clues, and you've got to guess. And this one guy used to phone me all the time, and I ended up, I kind of built up about a relationship with him. His name was Bill. And I learned that he was a pensioner, and he didn't really leave the house. He wasn't able to. He wasn't as mobile as he used to be. And his daughter used to come and drop his shopping off and stuff. So he wouldn't leave the house. And the only person that he would speak to was his daughter. When his daughter came and dropped off, shopping to him, or came and spent time with him. So to know that I was the only person really some days that he would speak to was quite humbling. It's really, really strange. And I think when people go into radio, they think it's all going to be showbiz and it's going to be interviewing celebrities and all this. Sometimes you get the real job satisfaction just from these little daft calls. Well, I think they're daft calls, but actually they turn out to be hugely impactful for the people who are on the other side of the phone. So I'm sorry I went a bit deep there, but that's the reality of it.
No, that's huge. That's That's such a warm story. I really hope the first gentleman got his 2004 mug, and I really hope that.
Don't spat my water out there.
Did he get the mug? Did you manage to source one for him?
I couldn't source a 2004 mug, but I don't think it was the same person. There was another guy who used to phone all the time who I actually met a couple of times. We used to do road shows. So I would go out to like the Rivergate Shopping Centre in Irvine and we would have a stage set up and
World
it
tour.
would, yeah, world tour, yeah, showbiz. And like we used to do like music and games and the street team would be there and we would get kids up on stuff and we'd give away prizes and money and stuff. And I met this guy all the time. I'll not mention his name just for his own privacy, but he's got learning difficulties as well. And I met his mum quite a few times, and he was a lovely, lovely guy, obsessed with radio. Actually went on to study radio. I think he's studying it at college just now. And I think he had autism or something like that. And he also was the same. Always wanted West FM merchandise, and I managed to get some merch, and I gave it to him like at these road shows. And his mum phoned me one day on the show and she was like, "Oh, hi Jonny, like it's such and such his mum. We met a few times." And I said, "Oh yeah, like I know, I remember who you are." The guy followed me on Twitter as well and he used to tweet me. So I knew his face and I knew his name and I remembered it. And she said, he is absolutely distraught because he had an old West FM mug that he used to like. That was the only mug that he drank out of, and he wouldn't take any drink if it wasn't in this mug. She said, I was washing it and I've smashed it, and he is like distraught. And I was like, oh God. And I said to her, what does it look like? Like, can you send me a photo of it? So she sent me a photo of it, and I was like, that's like the old branding. We don't even have that branding anymore. And I was like, oh, I said, I don't know if we've got any of those, like, because the branding's all changed. So we went through the rebrand, and there's a new logo and there's new mugs. I said, leave it with me. I said, what's your address? So I took her address, and I went through the office and I actually found this mug, but someone was using it as a pen holder. So I said to him, I was like, look, there's this guy. I explained the story. They were like, yeah, take it. Like, just swap it out for a new mug and I'll put my pens in this new mug. So I got it, gave it a wash, and I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to hassle like posting it, and she'll be waiting days for it. So I just after the show, I took the mug and I took some other like goodies and I stuck them in a bag, and we had like a whole store cupboard of like sweets and like all the stuff we would take out. And I just went and dropped it off, and
Oh wow.
he was delighted. Like he was so happy when I was at the door, and when I was there, he was trying to ask me all these questions about the radio, like all the daft things that these people used to phone up and ask. And he was absolutely delighted. And I got a really nice text off her actually the following week when I was on the show, and she was like, "Look, thanks so much for coming to do that. You didn't have to do it." But I just think it shows the power of local radio. I think a lot of people kind of campaign, and rightly so, that local radio is starting to die because these network shows are taking over. So local radio is one person going out exclusively to that local network. For example, me going out to Ayrshire on West FM. Network shows are where they do like syndicated shows. So for example, like Capital, maybe you're listening to Roman Kemp in the morning on Capital, but you also hear that in Glasgow, where there used to be a local Capital breakfast show like Des and Amy and Stephen, for example. So a lot of people say local radio is kind of on its way out, and it is in a way because of technology, and I suppose companies can save money if they've got one presenter instead of one on each station. They can just have one covering all of them. But the power of local radio is incredible. If it's not just dropping off that mug and the bag of goodies to that little guy who was distraught, it works in the other way as well. Like I mentioned at Radio Borders, when that guy dropped off the de-icer and the scraper, it's amazing, and it's so underrated. Like people, I don't think, unless you're a total nerd, you don't appreciate the value of what radio is and what it does. But yeah, it's insane.
I think when these shows go nationally, like you said, Capital One, I think it's so important for a presenter to understand the demographic and the cultural landscape. And when that fades away, I think that is when it fades away completely, I think that is when radio will die. I don't
Yeah.
think TV or voice activation or any other this technology will ever take it away. I think like you said, I think the killer of local radio will be when there is no cultural landscape. I
Yeah.
mean, you have a podcast yourself off the cuff, right? Do you ever think the grab and go nature of podcasts will replace radio?
It's funny you mention that. Yeah, and yeah, just before I go any further, yes, I do have a podcast called Off the Cuff. We only launched one series. I'm just getting my plug in now, David.
Go for it, mate. Smash away.
We only launched one series. It's myself and my friend James who do it, and it's just a bit of banter that is off the cuff. It's we don't prepare anything really for it, and it's just two pals having a bit of a laugh. We will come back at some point this year, just coronavirus in the way. But in terms of podcasts taking over, the grab and go nature of podcasts, absolutely, you're spot on. Like you've got creative control when you're creating podcasts as well. So you can talk about whatever you like. You're not confined to the 60-second link that maybe you would be confined to on the radio or from any commercial station. I think as well, you don't have to follow Ofcom rules, so you can swear if you like. If it helps you tell your story, then by all means go for it. But I think it's empowering people who maybe wouldn't have had a chance to be heard on an audio form, if you like, to be heard. And I think actually the future is probably largely in podcasts. A lot of these commercial radio stations are using podcasts as well. So like I mentioned, Super Scoreboard, the football phone in earlier, they've got a podcast which is just hugely popular. And actually, my girlfriend's dad lives, her mum and dad live out in the UAE. So they live out in Abu Dhabi, and he quite often listens to the podcast because he can't listen to Super Scoreboard in real time because of the time difference. They're 4 hours ahead, 5 when the clocks change. And he listens to the podcast because it's almost like a roundup of the best bits of the night. And he loves it. He thinks it's great. So I think a lot of these radio stations are now starting to use podcasts. They see the value in them. Some of the content that they're putting out is exclusive to the podcast. So these are bits you didn't hear on air. So these are kind of like the bits behind the show. So what happened off air or the conversations that happened off air. So I think these radio stations are seeing value in them now. And actually, I don't know the exact details of it, but I've heard people talk about this before. There is a podcast, let's just say it's called Podcast FM. I don't think it's called that, but there's a radio station somewhere, I think it's in England, and they basically play podcasts. That's all they play. They play pre-recorded podcasts. And I don't know if it's just any podcast, like you could submit yours. I don't know if they get people together in shows and they create podcasts that are then broadcast later on. But I definitely think it's got a huge place in the future. And if you think about it, like I know you listen to a lot of podcasts, David. I subscribe to a lot of podcasts, but I struggle to find the time to get around to listening to all of them. And I think my new technique of going for a walk or going for a good fall before I start my work in the morning, going for a slip, that's going to help me listen to more podcasts that I want to listen to, but that I've not found the time to do so. Because there's so many out there, but I think they've got a huge place and a huge part to play in future, and I'm quite interested to see where it goes.
I really like what you said about podcasts being the medium that gives people a voice who wouldn't have a voice otherwise. Like you or I are confined to the constraints of Twitter, which is only a certain amount of characters. Likewise with Instagram, you can only have a minute worth of video, whereas podcast is limitless. Do you think Jonny on air would have started a podcast if you didn't have radio experience, or do you think you would have still went down that route of expressing yourself, of starting a podcast?
I don't know. It's a great question. I suppose where you get to in your life is a combination of all the experiences that you've had. So you might, for example, if I take you, and I know we've only known each other for a short period of time. I don't know, has it been a year?
I don't know.
I don't know.
Not even.
But had you not have gone down the role of working, and I know you've mentioned it before, so I won't hold back in mentioning KPMG, and your employer have been very supportive of everything that you've been doing. You are obviously into your fitness, you're into development. And I suppose it's all of your experiences and the people that you've networked with that has led you to where you are today. And you've ended up having your own podcast. That's the road you've decided to go down. I think it would be difficult to say that if I hadn't have had the radio experience, I don't know if I would have had a podcast or not. I'm not into superstition or star signs or anything like that. And I know some people are, and that's fine. It's not for me. But I'm a big believer in, and my girlfriend, Kirsten, she hates when I say this. Everything happens for a reason. I'm not really into the whole karma thing, like good karma, bad karma, but I do believe that everything happens for a reason. And you know, if I fall into making a podcast, it's because it was just meant to be. And in fairness, I probably will say that because I've been in the radio kind of industry, and I still am, and I don't have like a permanent show as I used to. So I did have every Sunday, and I'd done a Sunday show for maybe 2.5 years. And I finished up with that show just prior to Christmas, when they made some scheduling changes. And I still do the freelance stuff. And I've got my main job aside of that. But I think it's a combination of my own experience in radio. I'm quite a creative person. Like, I'm not the type of person. It's actually very funny. We've done this thing in work recently, and it's called the Insights Test, or the Insights Tool. I can't remember the exact details of it, but if you Google like Insights Test or Color Wheel Insights, it'll tell you all about it. But you answer 25 questions or something. They're multiple choice, and you choose which ones you resonate with the most. And my Insights tool came back and said that I was a sunshine yellow. That's the color that I was. And you are a creative thinker, an inspirer. You don't do notes. You don't do like groundwork, if you know what I mean. Like, that's the type of person I am. I don't do like written down stuff, policy stuff. I don't do any boring stuff. I'm very creative in the way that I think. So if I wanted to get my points across, I would do something creative, like film a video or do a podcast. If I was different, and if my life experience was different, and that I became more of a person who liked structure and who liked to take notes, maybe I would write a paper on it, or maybe I would write a book, or I don't know, maybe I would write it as an article or something like that and post it as a blog. But I don't know. I'm getting very deep, but I think I've been brought down the podcast route because of my experience. I think that would be fair to say. Had I not had the radio experience, would I have done the podcast thing? Maybe, because I do see myself as a creative person, but I suppose I've never thought about it in too much detail before. But everything happens for a reason, so it was meant to be somehow.
I love that, and I would agree you're totally a sunshine yellow kind of trait person. I think I fall into that bracket too.
Yeah.
I want to understand, what's the saddest piece of news that you've had to broadcast on air?
So cheesy, but the day that I finished up my Sunday show, I know it was like, that's so selfish.
You
because it's news
self-absorbed.
Yeah, it's news about myself. But in all honesty, my radio show was a happy-go-lucky, easy listening thing. I always thought about those people that I spoke to who used to phone up, who we all, as radio people, I suppose we called them as like pain in the arse callers. But those people who I spoke to, like the guy Bill from the Borders, who I might have been the only person he spoke to that day, or the folk that were going through hard times and they listened to radio for escape. I wanted my show to be an escape, and I didn't want it to be too serious. So I kept it fun and I kept it lighthearted, and we kind of just took the mick a bit, I suppose. And yeah, I think that's the kind of show I wanted it to be, and it was. So I think I never really broke bad news, like terrible things that were happening in the world, whether it be, like COVID or like horrible like terrorist attacks and stuff. News dealt with that. That was their job. And I think we were sometimes reminded, like, don't comment on these things. It's the job of the journalists that the radio station hires to do that. So if I could be so self-absorbed to say that the saddest news I ever broke was on my final show, when, I said the week before, next week's going to be my final show. And I never really thought much about it because I thought, I'll deal with it next week. And I remember when I was doing my final link, so it was going to be the final time that I spoke on air, I'd written down on a note in my phone what I wanted to say. And I knew, like, I think you've got to like work out what's called back timing. So you need to make sure that you finish the show on time so that the next person starts on time. It's just a bit of a courteous thing. And so that you also got to the news bang on the hour. And I wrote down what I wanted to say, and I was like, right, I've got 60 seconds to say this. How do you cram in like a goodbye in 60 seconds? How do you, round up what's been a big part of your life for the past two and a bit years? And I remember putting that mic up and actually videoed it as well. I don't know why. It was a bit strange to video it, but I wanted some sort of memory, like, and it sounds pathetic because I wanted to post it on social media. Like, I don't know why. I suppose we're also brainwashed and that we share these moments on social media. But personally, for me, even just to have that video as a kind of memory was enough for me to video it. So I videoed it, and I welled up during it, and I was sad to be leaving the show. Like, it was kind of a mutual agreement almost that I'd had with the bosses and stuff, and they kind of knew my position. Like, I liked radio, but I don't know if I would do it full time. It was more of like a hobby. I like the job security that I have in my own job, but I never really got sad before it. And it wasn't until I put the fader up and the microphone was on and I was speaking, saying, well, this has been a blast. Like, thanks for tuning in and stuff. I just got really emotional. And I don't know why. It just came over me and my voice kind of croaked a little bit and I kind of teared up and I just didn't expect it at all. And watching it back, I don't know, it makes me feel not uncomfortable. I think that's the wrong word, but it just gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit. It gives me a little shiver because I think, God, that obviously I was suppressing how I felt. And it sounds pathetic because people go through some really tough times in life. And in the grand scheme of things, finishing up with a radio show and knowing that I'll get to go back and do other bits of radio, but it felt quite monumental that this was my show and it was coming to an end. And I just, as I say, overwhelmed with emotion, got a bit teary, posted it, and the messages that people were sending me back were just so lovely. Like, and I don't know, it was really, really bizarre. And I remember putting my microphone off, and Cassie, who works on the breakfast show at Clyde One, she does a show at the same time as, or did a show at the same time as me, but on Clyde One. So she was through in the other studio in the same building as me, and she got me, like, there was not many people in on a Sunday because it's the weekends, and she got me a couple of gifts, and then, like, we had a wee like chocolate fondue set thing. This was like pre-COVID, and she just made it nice and special, and I was so grateful for her. Like, her doing that was just so nice and so thoughtful. And I don't know, after I pulled the microphone down and I hit the ad break and that was my show done, I just felt a bit deflated and like a bit burst. It was strange, like really, really strange. But I think that's the saddest point and the saddest thing that I ever did on air.
I can
Pathetic,
imagine
really,
how
isn't it?
you would have felt in despair. Like, it was a huge part of your identity for so many years. You were not just known as Jonny Campbell, you were known as Jonny on air, like the radio presenter. And I can imagine having something taken away from you almost overnight. It would have such an effect on you. And I completely agree that would be sad news. But to wrap on a more positive note, what would you give Jonny Campbell or Jonny C or Jonny on air? What kind of advice would you give him right before his first radio show?
Or Jobby on air.
Jobby on
We spoke
air.
about that as well. Just a side joke before I get into that. B and N is so close on the keyboard, and you've no idea how many times I've signed off an email as Jobby and hit send. It is horrendous, and a few people who I sent emails to on the radio just couldn't get over the fact that I'd signed off an email as Jobby, and I do it all the time, and I do it so much that my own iPhone corrects Jonny to Jobby. Like, that's how often I make that mistake. But if I was to give myself some words of wisdom, I don't know. I would, to be honest, I wouldn't change anything that I'd done. And I think the way that I worked in radio, I had been offered a couple of bigger shows, if you like. I was offered like a network show at the weekend. It was really unsociable hours. So it was like 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., but across all of the stations in Scotland, which was huge. But I always said that I'd done radio as a bit of a hobby, and I always thought I was really lucky to do a hobby that paid me. And not many people can have a hobby that pays them money, which I just thought was incredible. And I always wanted it to stay that way. I didn't want it to become a job that I loathed to go to. I know a lot of people who work full time in radio and they love going to work every day. They just absolutely love what they do. But in all honesty, if I was doing this all over again and I could speak to my younger self, I would just say, don't change what you're going to do. What you're doing as you move through this is the absolutely right thing to do. And I think I'm really lucky to say that I actually don't have any regrets from anything that I've done through my time in radio. I'm not. It feels like it came to a bit of an end, the radio stuff, but the reality of it was I got all teary on that last link on that last show, and it was in 2 weeks later covering more shows, and in all honesty, covering better shows. Like, I was on a Sunday on one station, and those 2 weeks later I came in to cover 2 weeks for a guy called Callum Gallagher who does the evening show. And I was covering his show, which was a national show. It went out to 7 stations in Scotland. And 2 weeks after getting all bubbly and all teary on the radio, I'm back on. And it must have been a bit strange for anyone that had listened to me on a Sunday to hear me during the week covering his show. They must have been like, I thought this guy was leaving. Like, why was he greeting last week? What's going on? But in all honesty, it sounds very cliche, but I really do. I have no regrets. Like, I met a lot of really amazing people along the way. I've met a lot of friends for life, and friends that shared some amazing times with. I met some real like legends of radio, and I was obsessed with radio growing up. Like I said, that like I used to call in Clyde One all the time when I was younger, and I won a lot of stuff. And I mentioned at the start, like when I phoned in and won stuff, it was usually to George Bowie, and it was on his breakfast show. He had a guy called Des McLean, who is also now a comedian. And he used to have a woman on there called, I think her name was Sarah Proctor. She was called Dr. Proctor. And to go from being like 9 years old and phoning this radio station to then becoming a young adult and becoming friends with all of these people who were like, it sounds so cheesy, but like icons to me, was just amazing. It was like going full circle, like the 360. It was incredible. And all these people that I listened to now have their numbers in my phone. Again, that sounds so fanboy. To be friends with them on Facebook, like to actually just know them and not be like a listener anymore, was just incredible. And I'm so grateful for all the people that I met. There's some really wonderfully talented people in radio who are just talented beyond belief, but in ways that you wouldn't really think. As a listener, listeners are quite passive in the way that they listen. It's the radio's on in the background. But if you go in with a kind of ear, I wouldn't say eye for detail just to coin the phrase, but with an ear for detail, and you listen to what these people do, like your Ewan Camerons, Ewan and Kat, who are just the most iconic duo in Scotland, Boogie and Arlene as well, who are the Edinburgh equivalent. These people are really down-to-earth people, but insanely skilled in the world of broadcasting and being able to tell a story. Anyone can tell a story, but only some people can tell a story really, really well. And they're so animated, and their vocal effects that they use and their tone is just incredible. And I think comedians are quite like that. They have to be able to tell stories well. And I think that's probably why a lot of comedians end up in the radio. And the rest of us just aren't really that funny. But no, I wouldn't change anything that I'd done throughout my time in radio, and I'm just so lucky and so blessed to have met all these amazing people, to go to different events, to sit in on celebrity interviews, like I sat in on a Little Mix interview, to go to amazing events, which I can maybe get onto. Like we had an event called Clyde One Live at the Hydro, which I can talk about if you want. All these things were just incredible, and I'm so lucky and so grateful that I got to do it, because there's a lot of people who want to get into radio, and I mean, I've got some friends who are still pursuing that dream and are trying really hard to get in, and their breaks will come, they'll get a time, but it's all based on a bit of luck and being at the right place at the right time. And I'm just so lucky that I've had those experiences and I was in the right place at the right time, and I'm just incredibly grateful.
What's next for Jonny Campbell now that your show is not part of your identity?
I've got a big mortgage to pay off. No, I have a career that I'm working on and I'm building every day, kind of like yourself, David. So I work for an organisation who are a branch off from the government. They're called Scottish Enterprise. They exist to help the economy grow, which is a challenging thing to do at the moment, given the pandemic that we're in, but I'll not get too into work chat. I've got a fantastic job that I really enjoy, with a really amazing organisation who, again, I'm very lucky to work for. And you probably feel the same way. I'm very lucky to still be in a job in such difficult times, when lots of my friends, who some are in the creative industry, are on their backside. They have nothing In terms of income, I'm so lucky and so blessed where I work that I've still got a job, I've still got a stable wage coming in. But in terms of what's next for me, my job that I'm in just now, and has been my career even during my show, I've been surrounded by some really talented and incredible people who I can learn a lot from. Uh, and to be honest, I couldn't picture myself in any other role right now. Again, I'm a believer in everything happens for a reason, and I'm in this job because it's the right job for me just now. And if that changes down the line, then so be it. But again, I would like to think that I've got no regrets if I decide to move on or go to a different company or organisation or move to a different role. But my job lets me be creative because I do a lot of online events, so I still get to use the presenting skill set that I've got. I still get to do lots of networking. When I said I'm like a sunshine yellow and a social person, and it said on it I was an inspirer. I don't think I'm an inspirer, but it's maybe not so accurate. But I think as long as I can continue to do that and have fun and go to work feeling like it's not work, then I think I'll be content. And if there's any radio stuff that comes as a side of that, on top, if someone's so unfortunate to be unwell or maybe they need to take some holidays, if I get contacted to do radio stuff or a radio show or hosting events, then I'll be delighted to do that. But I'm quite a laid back person as a whole. I think Kirsten sometimes thinks I'm too laid back. I think she does the worrying for both of us because I don't really do any worrying. I'm quite chilled out. But yeah, I think that's the future for me. Ride the wave, see what happens, and everything happens for a reason. So if good opportunities present themselves, then so be it. But yeah.
Everything happens for a reason. I love that. And I love the roadmap of you going from a 8, 9-year-old radio fanatic to then being best friends with a radio presenter. And I guess one of my initial questions, my initial question was, do you think I'll be surprised about what I know? And I was surprised. Like, I didn't know any of that. So thanks for sharing. I'm sure the listeners also feel the same. Where can the people find you?
So if you want to say hello or connect with me, I'm Jobby on air. No, I'm joking. I'm Jonny on air. So JONNY on air AIR. On most social media, you can get me on Instagram, Twitter. I would say add me on Facebook, but unless you're a stalker, add me on Facebook. And if you want to connect on a more kind of professional environment, feel free to get me on LinkedIn. I'm Jonny Campbell on there as well. I've got a website, but it probably needs updated because I still do bits of voiceover and event hosting and stuff and radio presenting, but it probably needs a lick of paint. But yeah, if you want to say hello, then give me a shout. And I know that I've been inspired by, I've only listened to a couple of episodes so far, David, as I mentioned, but some of the people you've had on have been so inspiring, and I've not done it yet, but I'm going to reach out to Jen, and I hope she listens to this episode because I really, really enjoyed listening to her story and some of the different times that she went through, whether it be in Russia or America or whatever. So I'm going to reach out to her and maybe she'll accept my invite, and maybe one day we'll get to meet. But you've had some really awesome guests on this, David, so well done you. And I really appreciate you having me on. It's been good.
Thanks, mate. You fall into that awesome guest bucket too. This was an amazing chat. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for sparing the time, mate.